We did an anniversary special for Beach Boys concert, an anniversary special for Live in London, and now, everybody, welcome back friends for another Beach Boys concert album review. This time we're going to take an in-depth look at 1973's The Beach Boys in Concert, originally released on November the 19th, 1973. It also holds the distinction of being one of the few double LPs of new material in the Beach Boys catalog. Even releases like the Smile Sessions aren't necessarily two LP sets, and of course that's a conversation for another day. But a very interesting set, and often regarded as one of the best live albums the Beach Boys have to offer. Of course, this is available on many different formats. Here's the 8-track tape, which is interesting as it jumbles the order of the songs up quite a bit to make sure everything fits, and some interesting choices there. Of course, it also was released to CD as part of the twofer line. You can see the big sticker on the front there. I suppose that's okay, as it is a 2 LP set on one CD, so I guess you could make that argument there, even though when we usually think of twofers, we think of two totally different albums on one disc. Something a bit different there. Now, US fans of the Beach Boys, up until 1973, only had one actual chance to have a Beach Boys live album. 1964's Beach Boys Concert. I've done a whole video on that, talked about it at length. UK fans, and other fans in different parts of Europe, had another opportunity in 1969-1970 to pick up Live in London. Live in London would not be released in the US until 1976. So you can imagine a Beach Boys fan in 1964 going back to their record store in the fall of 1973, almost a decade later, to pick up the newest live LP, and how different the experience would be hearing this for the first time compared to hearing this for the first time. Quite a bit different. But that being said, most Beach Boys fans, maybe not all, but certainly a vast majority of them, say this is the best of their live work. Pretty interesting stuff. One way we can kind of back that up, you might remember when we talked about the documentary soundtrack, all but one of the live takes on this digital soundtrack album are taken from Beach Boys in concert. Their concert films, even today, tend to use audio excerpts from this particular album, especially the Fun 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 rendition listened to here. Very, very interesting release, and has a big fan base. The Beach Boys, of course, in the wake of albums like Holland, were trying to revamp their image. We have a very modern cover featuring Dennis Wilson, who actually doesn't do a lot in the album, so it's really interesting that he gets to be on the cover. And on the back, mine is very beat up. This is my original one. It was reissued on vinyl. I do have a reissue that's in much better shape. A very fascinating listen, and it's very interesting too to have a live album where both Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fataar participate. So it's also very unique in that regard, the only live album, only live album that was released independently where you can hear that. We'll talk about the Carnegie Hall stuff next week for its anniversary and get a little more into that, but certainly a very interesting bit. It also has a unique feeling compared to other live albums. Other live albums, of course, specialize in banter and gags, extended intros to songs, sometimes even some snarkiness from the Beach Boys. These digital download concert sets here are basically just the tape was running the whole show, so everything was picked up and it was released. Beach Boys in Concert is fascinating, though, as it combines many different songs over at least 7 different appearances and kind of forms them all into a track list. In that process of figuring out what to use and where to put it, they edited out most of the Beach Boys intro, most of the audience, asking for requests or participating, announcer stuff. All that is removed. And so Beach Boys in Concert is interesting because it's almost all music. There's very little in terms of spoken bits. We'll talk about a few here and there, of course. But very interesting and very unique to it, I think, that there's very little in terms of banter. Kind of surprising. So let's dive in. I'll show you actually one of the LPs here to start us off. Let's see what's on Beach Boys in Concert. And talk about its legacy. So there's side 1 of the record for you. This was released side 1 here. On the reverse is side 4. That's if you had a record changer. You would be able to only have to get up once to adjust for the new record. I also need to give an extra special thanks before I dive into the track list. My good friend Steve Lewis did his in-depth video on Concert not too long ago. I borrowed quite a bit from him. Go check out his channel and videos if you haven't already. He does a much better job than I ever could. Alright, starting us off then, we open with Sail On Sailor. Brand new song at the time, makes for a strong intro. Interestingly, one of the few Holland era songs, 1973 era songs, that actually stayed in a live set for quite some time. A lot of these ones we're going to talk about later were pretty much one and done after a couple years. So I like that Sail On Sailor has remained. It's on, of course, the 50th anniversary live album and so on. Good place to start. We go to Sloop John B, which I guess you could say is the only cover on the album, if you count Sloop John B as a cover. Most people would say, oh, it's more of an arrangement. I get you there. Unlike, say, concerts a few years down the road for the group, the Beach Boys here take those older songs and really kind of amp them up. They try to make them into rockers that a 1970s hip audience would really enjoy. And Sloop John B is no exception to that. They make it modern, at least for the time. Make it pretty fun. It's a cover that really stands out. I think they did a nice job on it. It also is the first Pet Sounds track on here. We'll come back to this later, but there are several Pet Sounds cuts, and we'll see the connection that Pet Sounds has to this as we go. Next up, another newbie from the Holland album, we have The Traitor. For many years, this was the only way to get a live version of The Traitor. It wasn't until the Sail On Sailor box set in the live bonus tracks section that we get another one from roughly the same time period. The Traitor never really caught on as a charting single or as a live staple. Indeed, I don't think it's been done live since the mid-1970s. But it is a fan favorite. It's on a lot of box sets and compilations. I think it's a little too long, a little too wordy for a proper live staple, but it is a really fun listen. I'm glad they attempted it too, being really ambitious. We'll see as this album goes, it's a combination of repurposing older songs and trying to push their new sort of Holland and Carl and the Passions, well, mostly Holland, kind of material there. Followed up by You Still Believe in Me, going back to Pet Sounds. Now, interestingly enough, this album would be the only official Beach Boys release of a live version of You Still Believe in Me until the Pet Sounds 50th anniversary box set, which contains one from the 1990s. In fact, their big Paramount show from Paramount Theater show from 1993, which we'll talk about again here in a little bit. Not one we often see from the Beach Boys. When we think of live Pet Sound songs, we get Wouldn't It Be Nice, which we'll get to later, Sloop John B, of course, and God Only Knows, which is actually not included here. We know it was in their set at the time, as we have some contemporaneous releases. The unofficial Live at the Nassau Coliseum release, I have a whole video on that, which is similar to this, although it does keep a lot of the banter, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on too. And also, perhaps most notably, and again a subject for a video coming very soon, we'll talk Carnegie Hall stuff here, also has some interesting track rearrangements. This is one of the records for that release. Alright, so after You Still Believe in Me, we have an oldie but goodie with California Girls. The audience goes absolutely nuts for California Girls. They really like it. So it's kind of surprising, and one thing that stands out, at the end when Mike Love comes out and says, "Oh, thank you, we mean it so much." And you can tell that they were not necessarily enthused to be performing California Girls and some of those older songs that were now seen as blasé for a live audience. We've talked about this before, but several of those digital releases from the previous few years also feature the group being pretty snarky and sarcastic and dismissive of their early songs. With California Girls here, it's pretty minor, but it is noticeable. But the group does an amazing job on it, and like I said, the audience is totally into it. And rounding out side one, we have Darlin' from Wild Honey. We don't get too much from kind of 1967 on this record here. In fact, we don't get anything from 1968 through 1971 either. But we get a couple Wild Honey cuts here and there. Not Wild Honey itself, it should be noted. But here we get Darlin'. It's a really fun rockin' live version. And if you watch my channel, you'll know my favorite Beach Boys compilation album is 10 Years of Harmony. And in selecting a song from this record, that was what they picked for this particular compilation. And it does say Darlin' recorded live, too. Not all Beach Boys compilation albums are honest on the cover about including live tracks, so I was glad this one is. It's a really fun rendition. I'm kind of surprised for this compilation they didn't pick one of the oldies, as this is a 1970s compilation. You'd think they'd throw Surfin' USA or something on there, but they opted not to. They went with Darlin'. I think that was a good choice. It's a rocker, and it's reimagined in such a way it feels very modern, up to date. Darlin', of course, has been a concert staple since 1967, but they've certainly worked on it quite a bit, and I think they go a lot harder than they do in these 1967 shows. Alright, if you flip the record over to side number 2, remember on this particular LP, side 2, back with side 3. Got that nice Reprise logo on there. And a steamboat. Don't worry, Mr. Fulton, they'll keep that steamboat rolling. We start off with Marcella, the only Carl and the Passions track to be included. And a good choice. Marcella's been a live staple somewhat regularly since the 1970s and really seems to be the only song from Carl and the Passions that was a success both at the time and later on. I think All This Is That has eclipsed it in favor of being like the big Beach Boys song for the album, but at the time I would say more people would have gone with Marcella than with All This Is That, and the group does a nice job on it. So still a relatively new one, not quite the newest, but pretty close. New enough they could get people who hadn't picked up the Carl and the Passions album yet to run out and grab that. Remember, that had been released as a double record in the US with Pet Sounds, so no doubt some of those extra Pet Sounds inclusions in this concert set could have also been a marketing tool. Follow up with Caroline No, another Pet Sounds one. Carl Wilson introduces it, again, one of those few pieces of banter and Beach Boys spoken word stuff that we actually get. Carl introduces it as one of his favorites. We would not get another official live Beach Boys version of Caroline No until the Pet Sounds box set, which also includes one of those Paramount Theater 1993 shows there. That was their big Unplugged tour to promote the Good Vibrations box set. Really nice to have it there. Really good version here. For a version where Brian wasn't there conducting or singing, came out pretty good, I'd say. We have Leaving This Town, the longest song on the album, and no doubt one of the reasons why the side 2 of the record has only 4 songs on it. So Leaving This Town was one of the big pieces of the Holland album. A long song, but you can tell someone really liked it and they really wanted to work with it. And they do a good job with it live. We'll see another live version very soon, as they also were doing it live at the Carnegie Hall show. I think today it'd be too long and too wordy to kind of do in the live set, but I like that it's here. It's very different, gives it some personality. And lastly, we have for side 2, Heroes and Villains. Something we'll talk more about next week is that Beach Boys in Concert was considered to be a single record release, promoting mostly newer songs. Things like You Need a Mess of Help to Stand Alone would be included, their cover of Jumpin' Jack Flash, and so on and so forth. One song from that potential lineup was released. The take of Heroes and Villains is on Endless Harmony soundtrack. Here's the 2000 reissue. But I really like the version they went with for In Concert. It uses the Bicycle Rider lyrics and some of the other discarded or altered lyrics from the Smile era, and a really fun live set, or live choice I should say. Very interesting that they would do it with alternate words, and no doubt that impressed a lot of people. If you flip it over there for side 3, we get Funky Pretty, another In Concert one, no doubt picked because it would sound very modern and very hip. They give it a little bit of an extra intro there. And yeah, a good choice. We would not see another live version of Funky Pretty released until Sail on Sailor. I know it has been done live, at least by Brian and Blondie in solo gigs, but really nice to have a proper Beach Boys version of it. And it is a really fun song too. If you got your Pisces lady with you, you can certainly enjoy that. So after Funky Pretty, we have a Wild Honey song. Again, not Wild Honey itself, but rather Let the Wind Blow, which is an interesting album cut. Let the Wind Blow we would also see done live on the Carnegie Hall show. I believe these are the only two official live documents we have of that particular song being done live. When we think of Wild Honey, of course we think of the title song or Darlin'. Remember, the group had experimented with other songs like Country Air and How She Boogalooed It for the live set and ultimately discarded those. So it's odd that years later they go back and say, yeah, Let the Wind Blow, that's what we need. But I'm glad that they did it. And they followed it up with a rockin' version of Help Me Rhonda. We've seen a few different versions of Help Me Rhonda from this time, sometimes with Dennis leading instead of Al, but they re-envision it as this hardcore rocker, and it works really well, and I kind of wish they'd almost done more than that. And then we get to one that, as Steve Lewis pointed out, and I agree with, a song you can't really reimagine as some kind of new wave rocker, Surfer Girl. And they do Surfer Girl pretty straight. You know, Surfer Girl had remained a concert staple throughout the late 60s when all the other songs from 1962, 63, 64 were being kicked out. They always kept Surfer Girl. They considered replacing it with Country Air, but that didn't go through. And Surfer Girl's done, again, pretty straight on here, but it's the dialogue that Mike Love has, again, one of those few instances of banter that we have, of him dismissing the song as an oldie but moldy. The lyrics are chiseled in a stone tablet in a field outside of Hawthorne and all kinds of stuff like that. And it kind of drags the mood down a little bit. Mike's pretty sarcastic. You can tell the group probably wanted to at least consider ditching Surfer Girl and going with something different, but maybe there was too much of an audience outcry, or maybe it was the easiest ballad to do live, so they just kind of rolled with it. Surfer Girl is one of the few songs that is consistently a concert staple from its release all the way up to the present day. It wouldn't be a Beach Boys show without Surfer Girl. And then lastly, of course, for the third side, we have Wouldn't It Be Nice? In the mid-60s, when the song was new, the group did a shorter version in concert. You know, that kind of thing, cutting out, you know, it seems the more we talk about it, and all that kind of stuff, and doing kind of a quickie version. They are up to doing it in its entirety for this. So that was really nice. We get finally a proper, you know, correct, full live version of Wouldn't It Be Nice? The audience loves it. Good choice. And of course, yet another Pet Sounds song, too. So everybody loves Wouldn't It Be Nice? And lastly, we kick off the final side. We're down to the end here. We start off with We Got Love. We Got Love was considered for Holland and ultimately not used, so it made it completely original to the in-concert LP, in much the same way we had several songs on Beach Boys Concert and one song, Their Hearts Were Full of Spring, on Live in London that were entirely unique to those albums. You wouldn't have them anywhere else in your Beach Boys collection. So In Concert gave us the original release of We Got Love, at least a widespread original release of it. I've always really liked We Got Love. In the Nassau Coliseum set, they have the audience do this little clap-along intro. They get them clapping to a rhythm, and then they jump into the song. They don't do that here. It was probably done, but just edited out. But a very interesting choice, a really fun song, and the audience seems, you know, pretty much into it. This would be the only release of We Got Love officially until Sail on Sailor, which has, of course, the studio one, and also an alternate live take from around the same time. It had popped up in a couple obscure places, like the Analog Productions release of Holland had it as a hidden bonus track. If you had an original European copy of Holland, you might have had We Got Love, hard to say, but in terms of an official de facto release, it was here, and then here in 2022. We go to Don't Worry Baby coming up next, what's often said to be the most polarizing song on here for how they rearranged the song and kind of try to update it. I will say the version on here, in which Al gets several chances to sing, interestingly reminds me a lot of the versions they did in the 80s and 90s, the one with the Everly Brothers, the one they did for Stars and Stripes. It sounds a lot more like that. You could tell they're kind of trying to reimagine it. This makes sense. Around this time, artists like Keith Moon were tinkering with it and trying to turn it into like a new love ballad kind of thing. So it makes sense the Beach Boys would sit down and say, okay, how can we redo this for a new decade? It's not my favorite version, but I like it because it's interesting. It's different, and in some ways it was kind of ahead of its time. I don't know, it's one everyone's a little bit different on. Of course, in the unofficial Nassau Coliseum release, it should be noted that Mike Love opens Don't Worry Baby with a question about what was the B-side to I Get Around. And if you win, you get a pizza date with Dennis Wilson in his trailer. There you go. Alright. Then we have Surfin' USA. We go back to the oldies and they do a pretty hardcore rockin' version of Surfin' USA. The audience is all over it. This track has always stuck out to me because Mike Love goofs up the lyrics. He says the San Onofre and Sunset line twice. He gets the beaches mixed up, you know, during the choruses, that kind of thing, which I'm sure is very easy to do, even for a song they've been doing for a decade by this point. But it's always stuck out to me because the rest of this sounds so professional and so streamlined, despite being compiled from several different shows, that it's really surprising to me that Mike Love goofs it up. I will say, though, he also goofs it up in those Carnegie Hall shows, so maybe it was done intentionally, I don't know. We have a big thing for Good Vibrations. The audience is going nuts. They do a minimal audience participation bit. We're not quite to the 80s yet, where they have, you know, the Beach Boys stop singing and the audience sings instead. Because for many years, Good Vibrations was the main audience participation song. But they aren't quite to that point yet. So there is some audience participation, but all in all, it's just a really good version of Good Vibrations. And we end up with Fun, Fun, Fun. And no one has ever seemed to have been able to positively ID what show this version of Fun, Fun, Fun is from. But I will say, it is the only song with someone who only had Beach Boys concert. And this album, as there are two live Beach Boys ones back in 1973, it was the only song that would have been on both of those. And of course, this version of Fun, Fun, Fun on concert is very heavily edited and remixed in studio. This one feels a lot more organic. I'm sure some studio work was done throughout this record, but this one much more organic, and I see why they use it for their concert films even today. So at the end of the day, we have 4 brand new tunes from Holland, 5 if you count We Got Love. So it's definitely pushing the new stuff, which is fine. Marcella's still fairly new, so that would work. And then we have 3 things from Pet Sounds, and only a total of 6 from kind of the pre-1966 early hits period. But still a good variety, still a lot there. And so songs like Do It Again and Wild Honey were considered but not used. Again, we'll talk more about those next week. But a very interesting set list. At the end of the day, Beach Boys in concert probably made a lot of people happy in 1973. It charted relatively high, about number 25, so it was one of the highest charting albums the group had during that decade. Excuse me, I'm running out of breath here. And would also go gold, something that hadn't happened in a while. What are your thoughts on Beach Boys in concert? Please comment below. Tune in next week for the anniversary of the Carnegie Hall concerts. Until then, my friends, go out there and have some fun, fun, fun.